Good morning and welcome. This is the Extended Disc 30-minute webinar. And our topic today will be successfully onboarding employees with the help of Extended Disc. Before we get into it, I just want to remind you that this will be recorded. So if you need to leave or you would like to share this recording with any of your coworkers, please feel free to do so. It will be on our public website. As for questions, we love your questions. Unfortunately, we just don't have time live to answer them. So we do have a question section during this webinar. Please feel free to add any questions in and we'll follow up with you after the webinar has ended. So oftentimes we overlook onboarding opportunities because we tend to focus on recruiting and hiring the right people. But let's first start off with, what do we really mean when we are talking about onboarding? And sorry, it's taken me a minute, but my name is Christina. Sometimes I forget. And I'm joined with my coworker, president of Extended Disc, as my guest, Markku Kauppanen. Welcome.
Thank you, Christina.
Sorry to make you sit there for a while.
No, I'm quite all right.
Okay, so what do we really mean when we're talking about onboarding here?
Yeah, sometimes people tend to confuse onboarding with the new employee orientation. And I want to be very clear that today we're going to be talking about not the orientation where new employee may go and get some information about important policies and signing all the new employee documentation and benefits forms, etc. Really what we're talking about here is the first critical days, the first critical weeks and months that the new employee will experience. And we want to make sure we really have a clear plan how we really set the new employee for success. And today we're going to talk about this topic from a couple of different angles. We talk about what manager can do to make sure that the new employee will become successful long-term employee, but also how the co-workers, the new employees' colleagues can play a very important, and they do play a very important role, making sure we have a successful new employee.
Okay, so, well, let's just get started.
Yeah, let's get started. And when it comes to, I think most people know that hiring new employees is a very challenging, expensive endeavor. Organizations spend a lot of time interviewing people. Not only that, they have to advertise the new job openings. When they find somebody who is a good candidate, they often do different kind of testing, background checks. They check references. It's a very time-consuming, expensive process. But it's also quite interesting. For example, if you look at like labor statistics, on any given month, when we look at the number of new employees that are hired throughout the country for new different organizations, the number of employees who are also laid off or quit their jobs, those two numbers are quite equal. And of course, there's some differences, but many months those numbers are almost similar. So a lot of this activity is happening. I realize that when people are laid off or they are discharged for different reasons, those are valid terminations, but we also have a situation where employees are simply leaving because they don't feel they are able to make contribution or feel motivated than employee and then new employer. So we want to make sure that we really have a successful onboarding process, so we set those employees for success. Because a lot of times, again, like you said, we tend to focus on the recruiting activities, but the onboarding is often overlooked. And this is something that is actually very simple to do. It's not a difficult process to do, and it has incredible return on investment. Like some research have looked at organizations that have strong onboarding process, and what they have found that they have a new hire retention of over 80%, and their productivity is increased by over 70%. So we're talking about activity that's simple, easy to do, but has huge impact on how successful those new employees will be. Obviously, we know that the employee turnover is expensive. And really what we want to do with this onboarding process, that we want to make sure we focus on how do we convert these new hires to successful and lasting employees.
So what I'm hearing here is that, we do a good job of hiring people, the right people, in fact, but oftentimes they leave not because of, the skills or the what the job role it is, but sometimes it's oftentimes a style or personality conflict.
It could be that, or also the manager and the coworkers may not dedicate enough time and focus on making sure this new employee is successful. Some managers I've seen have almost become a little bit cynical about the new hire process. They feel that, well, employee turnover is part of the process, and even that they set some time aside to make sure they welcome the new employee, they really don't have a clear plan of how do I really set this employee for success? How do I make sure that the first 30 days especially is going so well?
Marco, can you talk a little bit more about, and you addressed managers, but can you talk a little bit more specifically about that?
Yeah, I think the manager's role is really critical in this process. In fact, I think it's the most critical of all. And the manager must make sure that they take full responsibility of making sure the new employee is set for success. And in this process, the first impressions are really critical. One study found out that a third of the employees make a decision whether they will stay at the organization in the first 30 days. And this is particularly true with the millennials. They are not looking for a career with the same organization for the next 30 days. They're looking for a place where they can be part of the team and they feel that they are making a contribution, not only to the organization and their team, but the wider society as well. So you want to make sure that you invest the time to really spend the time to understand who this new employee is, make them feel welcome, and make them sure that they have a clear understanding what they can expect working for your organization, for your team, and you as a manager. Of course, there are some common practices that a lot of people already know about. You want to make sure that everything's ready for them. They have a clean desk. They have all the supplies and IDs, etc. We want to make sure we are introducing the new employee to the rest of the team so they feel welcome. We may want to even set aside to take them to a lunch to make sure that, again, we are investing in this new employee's success. So those are some of the common things that we need to talk about. But really what I want to focus today more is how extended disk information can be used to make sure we have successful onboarding.
So I think what we're all hearing is that the manager's role is they're a key player in the employee's initial stage of employment, which is the onboarding, those first 30 days. So what can happen, Marku, when the onboarding process gets overlooked or goes wrong?
Well, you know, Christina, we mentioned this in previous webinars many times that, of course, employees quit for different reasons, but the main reason is that they quit their manager. They're not quitting the organization. And for example, one study found that almost 90% said that they wanted to meet with their new manager their first day of employment. Sometimes the managers are not really setting aside that time, and more importantly, many of them had expectation. In fact, almost 85% of employees have expectations. The manager really took time to introduce their new employee to their new team, all the team members, and make them feel very comfortable. Often that is overlooked. And what typically happens is that the new employees are not failing because of their lack of skills or their knowledge or experience. What I find is that by the time a hiring manager is interviewing somebody, typically those candidates look fairly similar. They have the same education background, they have the same experience, they have the skills and so on. But still, many of them do not succeed. In fact, they have everything that they need to be successful. Of course, we need to continue to develop those skills, make sure we provide ongoing training and development, but that is not the reason that most employees do not stay. The main reason is that for whatever reason, their personality does not mesh with the manager style, or their work style is a little bit different. We don't really understand who the person is and how we can best utilize their strengths to help our team and our organization to succeed.
So what I'm hearing is that oftentimes many of our organizations already have a good hiring process in place, and we tend to hire the people that fit on paper. They all have very similar skills. They match what we're looking for, but where it can go wrong is with the personality or the work style not meshing.
Yeah, I think most people, when they think about jobs that they were not very happy at and they maybe quit the job, they often went to the manager. The manager was just not easy to work with. Mm-hmm. We didn't understand perhaps them. They were unclear in their communication, what the expectations are. And it's an uncomfortable situation for the new employee to be, or even employee for a longer period of time. It's just not something that's motivating. So the sooner we can get the employee to really feel comfortable and feel motivated, and making them feel that they're making a contribution as an individual, they'll be more successful for a longer period of time. And now when we look at how extended disk can help in this process, of course, we're going to assume that the new employee has completed the extended DISC questionnaire. And that really helps the manager to really have a great understanding, even before their first day, who the new employee is. Now the new employee knows that what their motivators are, what are their work style preferences, what is their communication style. The manager can be well prepared for the very first time they meet to make sure that they are adjusting their style.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I know that as managers and in many parts of our jobs, we tend to autopilot, right? We fall into that trap where we do something well, and then we just keep showing up that way.
That's so true, Christina. It's very easy to autopilot, and sometimes managers are even more guilty of that because they have this mentality, hey, I'm the boss. But that is not going to be a successful approach for the boss, because if the boss really, a manager really thinks about, and I think it's very important to remember that if the manager keeps in mind what type of investment they are making in this new hire, not only in terms of what has happened up to the time of their first day, but the long-term implication of having a successful employee versus somebody who's not successful or somebody who leaves. I think that's going to give every manager enough motivation to say, I need to set up some time and some focused effort to make sure that, especially in the first 30 days and a couple of months, I'm really spending enough time and effort to help this new employee to succeed. And one of those things to do is, the key point is that the manager must modify their style. Of course, they know what their extended DISC style is. Now they know the style of their new employee. Now they can take the responsibility of modifying their behavior, how they communicate with them effectively. So it's not like having the first bad blind date where the conversation is just not going anywhere, both feel comfortable. It's the manager's responsibility to make sure they are modifying their behavior so there's going to be very clear and effective communication. We want to make sure the new employee feels comfortable and okay, and that we also very early on are able to set very clear performance expectations. And of course, when we are understanding who we are dealing with, who our employee is, we can make sure that we take the appropriate, make the appropriate adjustments in our communication style, in our motivation style, to make sure that the employee really understands what the expectations are. Now, I want to add a final thing here, and especially for your D-style managers, you need to be patient with new employees. Some managers expect the employees to perform at a very high level a little bit too early on. There's a lot of research on this, but what the research has found out is that on average, it takes about 8 months for a new employee to really reach their full potential. And by the way, that's a good reminder for us to think about how important the onboarding process is. If it takes 8 months for us to get a new employee to reach their full potential, and you add the time of trying to find a new employee, we may be talking about 10 to 12 months whenever we fail to keep somebody and make them a successful employee in our team.
That's a big ouch pain point. Markku, I want you to show our audience kind of how specifically using an extended DISC assessment can we use it in the onboarding process?
Well, one of the things we know that when somebody completes a questionnaire is one time with extended DISC, we can provide reports in different formats. One report could go to the employee, and we can use that in his or her training and development. One tool that we have is what we call it's an assessment for the manager. So employee is not going to get this report. The manager is. And this is very helpful to really prepare the manager to successfully bring a new employee on. Because, for example, you can provide essentially what I call the cliff notes of this individual. It very concisely and clearly identifies who this employee is. What is their communication style? What motivates them? And it helps the manager to really think about, when I start interacting with this new employee, how should I modify my behavior? It gives you that roadmap. What do I need to specifically do? Also, what we can look at is, what are the things that really motivate the new employee? If I want to make sure that the new employee feels motivated very quickly, I must understand what those motivators are. I want to make sure I'm really providing opportunities for the employee to feel energized and feeling that they early on make a contribution, because that is important, especially with the millennials, because they're really thinking about the larger impact that they are making. Also, I want to have a clear understanding of what the most significant strengths are, so I can utilize those early on. But I want to also understand how they react to pressure. new employees typically feel more pressure. They tend to be a little bit stressed because integrating into a new team and organization and dealing with the new manager, it is stressful. And I want to understand how I may see some of those signs of stress so I can, like in other words, kind of take the temperature of that employee from time to time. I really want to pay attention what's happening, especially at those critical early weeks.
And I think it's so important. I mean, that is a weapon for you as a manager. I mean, I don't want to say it literally, but it gives you things to look for versus trying to have them to guess when this employee is under stress.
Yeah, I think when a new employee comes in, of course, we have a lot of information about their background, education, but essentially you're trying to figure out what makes this employee tick. And once you have the information to really understand what actually motivates them, how they communicate, I can then make very clear conscious decisions. What do I need to do as a manager to modify my style? And it's just a lot easier and it's not as time consuming.
Exactly.
And also, if I understand what the employee's communication preferences are, I can very clearly make adjustments to how I communicate. Maybe I talk more, talk less, more details, less details, on and on, and make those adjustments to, again, understand that how do I really set those expectations and make the new employee feel comfortable. And finally, one thing I want to share is that in the tools we can look at and identify what are the employees' greatest strengths and what are their greatest development areas. So again, I can utilize those strengths early on. I want to make sure they have successes very quickly. And also I want to look at what are some of the development areas. So as a manager, I can quickly begin to coach on those areas, especially if they're important for their long-term success.
I think that's a great example of how we can use a specific individual report. This one is targeting the manager about his or her employee. But Markku, can you also give us an example of how we can use an extended DISC work pair in an onboarding process?
This is something that honestly I don't see being used enough because this is a very powerful way for a manager to get new employees started very successfully, very quickly. And this is very quickly how the process works. Once a manager and the new employee have completed the extended DISC individual questionnaires, the report is very easy to create, so they don't have to complete additional questionnaire. But essentially what happens here is that the manager and the new employee sit down and talk about who they are in terms of their behavioral style. So we really are able to create openness and trust very, very early on because it's something that for a new employee, it's probably first time they experience this kind of thing when they started at a new job, when the manager is very openly talking about who he or she is. So it's a unique experience that I think really demonstrates a very rare personal interest in that new employee. And it really shows also caring of their personal success. I'm really spending the time to talk about how we are different and how we are similar and how I can help you as a manager to have a long-term success in our organization. And in the process, it really creates that awareness of understanding of who we are. And we can also proactively discuss any potential challenges that we may have. Because when two people have interactions, they typically are different. Eventually, there will be some friction and some conflict. And when we are talking about them early on, before they happen, we can be very proactive about it and we can prepare when those things happen. And when they do happen, we know how to deal with it.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is that, for us as managers, oftentimes we focus on, setting the tasks and goals for that employee. But even if it gets us out of our own comfort zone, if it's a powerful way to keep to talk to talk about how we can establish that trust with our employee.
That's absolutely true. And when a manager is taking the time to talk about what are their strengths and their development areas, I think one thing that it does very clearly, but very subtly, is that it expresses a deep self-confidence. When somebody is able to talk about their strengths and development areas, especially somebody that we don't really know that well at this stage, it really expresses that, hey, I'm confident in who I am, and I have a strong self-esteem, and I'm not afraid to share with you, my employee, that I have some development areas to work on too. And this is what I'm doing to trying to constantly improve. It also sets an expectation that I expect you to work on your success. It's something that is never-ending process, and it's something that new employees almost never experience. It's a very, very powerful experience.
And as you know, you hear us as trainers here, we say it all the time. What truly makes a successful manager or individual is they own who they are, their strengths and their weaknesses. And to take it to the next level, they have that ability to modify their style.
Absolutely.
So show you're human, show you're not perfect as a manager. That will build that openness and trust that Markku talked about. Markku, can you give us a specific example of how we can use the work pair assessment tool?
Sure. I'm going to share a couple of quick things from the assessment. There's obviously a lot more information that can be provided, but one of the things we could include, it's optional, we can show what are the extended disc styles of the two individuals. So for example, here we have the manager, Sarah, and we have the new employee, Stephen. And if I'm Sarah, I can look at this information and really help me prepare for the interactions with the new employee. If I'm Sarah, I probably want to keep in mind that I'm a high I style, meaning that I tend to be very enthusiastic, like to communicate and being talkative, and tend to maybe sometimes get a little bit sidetracked with a lot of exciting opportunities. But I also want to make sure that I remember that Stephen is different from me. Stephen is a D style who tends to be focused on tasks. They want to be decisive, and they want to move quickly, and they want independence, and they probably do not want as much interaction with their manager. And if I, in addition to keep in mind that I'm a low D style as a manager, that prepares me to have a clear understanding that I need to modify my behavior quite significantly when I'm interacting with Stephen. And manager, it's always very important to remember that the only thing I can control is how I modify my behavior. I can try to motivate Stephen, but I cannot make them modify their behavior. And if I take the responsibility of modifying my style, how I communicate, how I motivate, how I coach, and how I lead my new employee, I really take charge and can hold myself accountable to make sure Stephen's going to be a very successful long-term employee at my organization. Also, what I can look at is I can look at some more specific things on the reports. For example, how we communicate differently. So, for example, if we focus on our direct goal-focused communication, Sarah will be very aware that Stephen tends to be very goal-oriented and direct in their communication. One, I may need to think about that sometimes Stephen may come across a little blunt, and I should not take it personally. And second is that I really want to have a successful communication with Stephen. I need to modify my communication style. I need to be more direct, and I need to be talking more about the goals and specific what we want to achieve. So I'm going to take responsibility of making that modification, because that will ensure my communication will be more effective with Stephen.
So I think what it shows here is that, with differences in our styles, conflicts not only will likely happen, but they're going to happen. So if you can address it proactively up front with this non-judgmental approach, it's going to be much more effective and successful when it does occur, right?
If you think about it, if you put it back in the context of how do you actually use this, here Sarah and Stephen can early on have a frank conversation about how we communicate differently, for example. Now, when we are both aware that we have these different communication preferences, we both have the awareness of, hey, that is who he or she is. And when we see those kind of different behaviors, we are not judging them by their behavior, and we are just understanding that that's how they tend to prefer to communicate. And it's a lot easier for understanding than making judgment about who that person is. I don't like her, I don't like him. Now we can understand and value our differences.
Or trying to guess.
Exactly.
So I think that hopefully will give our audience a better understanding of how a manager can help in that onboarding process. But we also know that we tend to work in teams. Our department tends to be teams. We work with other teams. Markku, can you talk a little bit about how team assessments come into play with onboarding?
Yeah, team assessment can be really helpful, because not only is manager important, the successful onboarding, the coworkers are. And in fact, what we have found is that studies have shown that for a new employee to feel socially accepted is a critical factor into their success initial stages. They want to be feeling being part of the social network. They want to be part of being part of the team very quickly. And when everybody has completed the extended team assessment, we have the team assessment. We are able to provide information not only to the coworkers about the new employee, but for the new employee about what his or her team looks like, so they can understand how we are different, so they can very quickly integrate in the team, so they can quickly become familiar with the important day-to-day operations. They are able to understand how my coworkers are different, how I can most effectively work with them. And also, it helps me understand how I can integrate and work better with the other departments. Most of us are not only isolated and work in our own team, we have to integrate and work with the other parts of the organization. And what I see a lot of organizations are doing, they are setting up a very informal or formal mentor or buddy systems where the new employee is paired up with somebody that is responsible for helping this new employee to become successful quickly. Of course, here again, you can use the peer assessment to help that mentor and the new employee get off to a great start, to really make sure that they have effective communication. And throughout this entire process, the culture of the team opens up the new employee much faster, because they understand not only the task that we need to focus on, but I also understand who I'm working with. So it creates that open culture that has the trust and openness and ability to really understand how we are different and value those differences and make sure we are using our strengths to our greatest impact.
So what I'm hearing is that beyond, the manager, team members are a big factor in the success of a new employee.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you look at the team assessment, everybody can see who we are, what are our strengths, what kind of adjustments we are, and the new employee can quickly understand, in essence, where my place is in this team. Who are the people who are very similar to me? Who are the employees in the team that might be a little bit different, and I need to spend more effort and energy modifying my behavior? And finally, when they see those visual reminders of this, whether they are in the conference room walls or manager's office, it really communicates very clearly to the new employee that we're using this model to help everybody to be more successful. We understand how we can make our individual contribution, not only the team, but the organization, but how we also use the language of DISC in all of our interactions. So how we are interacting with the coworkers, our customers, our prospects, and most importantly, how we always need to think about who I am and how I need to learn to identify the styles of other people and then modify my behavior for greater level of success.
So not to cut you off, Markku, but we are getting close to our time limit. I want to respect it. So could you just kind of summarize what we've talked about today about onboarding?
Onboarding process using extended DISC is a very simple process, and it doesn't take a lot of effort. The bottom line is that you just need to do it. And it's something that has significant return on investment. We talked about a lot of statistics in different studies, but what I found important when I was researching this topic a little bit further, I found that 58% of employees are likely to stay at the company for 3 years if they experience a great onboarding program. So I don't know if your audience members, they think about their own organization. I know that hiring a new employee has a different cost. For some, it may be less. For some, it may be more. But when you think about all of the returns you can get, plus taking a little bit of effort using this information to successfully onboard your new employee, I think it's a pretty great investment.
That sounds great. So thank you, Markku, for joining me today. We will have another webinar coming up. Our next one is next Wednesday, February 28th. And this is the one that we talk about a lot. So it's always good to get a quick refresher. We're going to talk about the 4 steps to effectively using extended DISC. It's a great way for you as a coach to convey it, to deliver DISC to your own clients and employees. So please join us. We also have additional webinars. You can find them on our public extendeddisc.org website under the events. Thank you all for joining us today, and thank you, Markku, for joining me.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, everyone.